Đó là cái gì? Đó xem trên là chúng mình xem trên là này cái số đấy, chỉ là ya xem trên là chỉ về cái là nó xem là cái tăng hộ đấy sẽ là anh chỉ mình xem trên là tại vì sẽ là xem là cái tăng hộ đấy sẽ là cái gì để này có suy đấy, chỉ là đó xem là cái xem là chỉ về cái là anh chỉ là bảo vệ ta, anh tuyên sẽ bảo ta, anh chỉ chào ta là thế vậy thôi này, anh 직접 비트는 기시고리에서 기시나 두는 시고리에서 나지 미기 심전이야 따위 갑리 심전 통일이야 심전 담제랑이야 진침보리 그진침보리 지난 대수기를 때네 는 스토시 디유주야래 는 심전 담주도 산교고방 토야 돼야 심전 대수를 때네 토고를 제가 되네서 심전이랑 진침보다 그진침보 시위 심비게 야 심전 진침보자다 템비토네 어두신의 섬당고리에서 anh đi mà giờ anh cái gì vậy anh chỉ trồng một chiếc đó anh chính chỉ có chăm sẽ xem trên cái là cái đó chú nào xem cái chăm bao đó đúng là真的xem cái在外你去xem不都是呢上当我的也是我可是讲是真的虚弱的。
Good evening. So last week we came to look at a conclusion of a section looking at how to behave, how to speak to others, and last week in particular, we saw how when we talk to others, the way in which you should talk to them is with honesty, speaking, in other words, speaking from the heart, and in a manner that is both pleasant and gentle. And the way to come to speak in this manner is to transform our mind, transform our way of apprehending others. In other words, through having developed a deep appreciation for others, through recognizing the benefit that they bring into our lives, both directly and indirectly, the kindness that they bring, have shown us in this and lives previous, we develop a closeness towards them, a tenderness towards them. And this then becomes naturally expressed in how we communicate with others. That when we look on them, we look upon them with a heart that is open and loving. And then this is expressed through a way of speaking, which is gentle and pleasant.
That didn't much to keep Gewa top chair, a young grace to top chair, you want to can see said Gewa top chair or and my didn't share it.
So continuing then in this section, in this chapter, we come to look how to accumulate extensive virtue. The 81st verse, continuously motivated by a strong resolve, also motivated by antidotes, in the fields of excellent qualities, benefit and suffering, great virtue will be reaped.
냠는 체바이나 안데네기 느껴와 체와用过的是别人说냠내로서 살직 진이제 야니 샤샤데 말 맞아 para샤 야 para도 제발레 아니 무투 이제 개와 냠내 제바이나 디 개와디 누버 체용 거래서 개와 체래서 딱 벌써.
So this verse presents how when one accumulates virtue, one can accumulate virtue of immense strength. So looking at the very first word, that of continuously. Here then, we are being doing accrue virtue of a great virtue or virtue of great strength. One should be engaging in virtuous deeds continuously as opposed to sporadically. Because by continuously having a mind and thereby one's speech and behavior virtuous, the strengthening habituation will lead to great virtue being accumulated.
동외 셈바 짐바 다야레 수름소이 룽아 숨샤라 네바 직메 세베 삼마 다야데 수름소하라와 아니 젤리아 아니 룽아 이숨샤네 기위 자와 간네시나 젤레 펜바 두긴 셈베 펜도 지긴 셈베 젤레 땅긴 셈베 삼마데 동아 셈바 동외 셈바 차기로와 Dine za dizon joge ne lunga isu shala ne chigi me sembe samodi charchi tamale da muduje an tabaine namgyune dusene tabaine da kewa de samlodi kewa shukchiri sirda namgyune yane yandu tabaine go komshil maso nube cheche rugor ba chizade shukche yonade dine jowa donwe sembare denege da jimbe nyamne ja churimre soba komyare anja shanlia jamba ta zewa komyare undi membiga ngadu namgyune ya koncholia chobopuya 아니 자세와라 소바도 고와고와라 소바 나 차르지 니숨 제발에 양 무디 제베나 개와 가리네 그 두개도 무디 두바이나 아니 다버도 신 제베나 개와 되니 개와 되다 개와 체용을 해서 되다 개와 체용 아직 또 숨도
What we must be very clear on what is the meaning of great virtue. So what is virtue? It refers to our way of thinking. In other words, that our mind is virtuous. Because when the mind is virtuous, what follows from the mind, speech and behavior, itself will be virtuous. So a mind that is virtuous would be a mind, for example, that is committed to not causing any harm to others. And in addition, may well be a mind that wants to give of oneself to others. So these are the expressions of generosity, or generous attitude, and an ethical mind. So if a person is sporadically has a mind of ethics, or sporadically has a mind of wanting to give of oneself, being a sporadic mind, the strength is likely not going to be growing. It will be quite haphazard because it comes and it goes. But if one's mind is continuously virtuous, for example, the determination in all circumstances not to cause harm, or the determination in all circumstances to give of oneself, then one can understand how due to this continuous attitude, this continuous virtuous attitude, then one will accumulate great stores of virtue. So this is in relation to ethics and generosity, but it would be the case in relation to all virtuous minds. It's the continuity that is one aspect that leads to great virtue being accumulated.
anda 원신기 랑밤 세대다 원신기 랑발에도 당저 계획 자와 냠는 제도기 듬바 슉체 모세 어두 듬바 슉자보르 제대네 슉체베 권에 주바이나 안에 개와디 네가 채용을 해서 가서는다 개와 제도 개와디 두비에게 듬바 빼 슉체 보시나 아니 개와디 제네 개와디 네가 채용을 해서 다 개와 두에 임발에데 듬바 슉체 보시라 슉시라 메디게 안지 데네게 소수게 배는 안 주게 제가 부야라 꼬라야다 데니저베나 소수게 지금 뭐시라 미수 두고도 상하임 두고 들어셔베나 꼬라 두고도 개와 춘춘사거데 개와 슉치 뭐라 용거 말아서 딜레 소소라는 게 안지 바 데니게 또 할베 야부 임비기 김제다 델레 안지게 김주 거버 김제 터지다 디 지긴세 빼 야고래 돼서 선배 당에 디 마진에 하면 선배 데니게 제도기 좀 슈자고 군이 라제 안에 개와 두바이나 안에 개와디 슈체용을 해서 답변에 제도 군어서야 돼 개와지야 된게 잠재 고미야기 안에 군어 잡고 해야다 안에 짐에 동에 셈바 고미야기 안에 군어 잡고 해야 안에 수름수야기 룽아서 예제도 수름수야기 순고구도 셈베게 된 좀 잡고 해야다 기회 잡아 냠네 꼬라꼬야 차푸야 먼저 가사야 그래 이내 계획 잠 마진이랑 군어 주고 와데 되네 군어디 배슈 델이야 제도기 슈잡고 누가 슈잡고 쳐베나 안디군에 라제 개와 주베네 개와디 누가 개와 체레서 원신기 랑세데.
The second aspect that leads to the accumulation of great virtue is where one's virtuous actions are motivated by a strong resolve. So strong resolve is a determined attitude. So to make it clear, we can think of what the opposite to a strong resolve to engage in virtue would be, and that's more of a wishy-washy attitude, where it goes with being sporadic. That from time to time, and one's resolve is quite weak. A small obstacle will mean one will not engage in virtue. So, for example, if one wants to do some circumambulation in order to accumulate virtue, but one insists on going with a friend, otherwise not at all, immediately one is making an obstacle. And moreover, the real reason one wants to go with a friend, perhaps a particular one, is to have a good conversation. So therefore, one can see whilst as superficially as a virtuous activity, the resolve is really weak. The determination is really weak. So what one requires in order to accumulate great virtue from an act is a strong resolve, a determined attitude. And this is in relation to any virtuous endeavor. So if one's developing the ethical restraint of abandoning their 10 non-virtues, and that ethical motivation is one of strong resolve, that will mean that one is ethical in all circumstances, not just when it's easy, but when doing the right thing is difficult, one will still do so. When refraining from non-virtue is difficult, one will still do so if one has strong resolve. So too the generous attitude. If it can be easy to give something when you have a lot, but when your resources are limited, to still help those in greater need, that then it requires a stronger resolve, a deeper determination. And likewise with accumulation of mantra or whatever it may be, a strong resolve will ensure a focused motivation, a focused motivation, and that one isn't easily overcome by the various obstacles and distractions that arise in one's life. So therefore, one needs not only a virtuous motivation to engage in virtue, but when that virtuous motivation is one of a strong resolve, then the virtue that is accumulated will be great in strength.
Andine, Nyembo India Langba Yangba Nis, Chisada Nyembo Samna Tanje, Nyembu Kunda Laje, Kewatuba, Kewa the Shukchi is, Nivache Moris, Nyembo, Penanga, Ducha, Nyembo de la Machapa Sach, Machabada, and the Kondo Nyembo, Jamba Kumiala Sopa, Denigi, Dushina, some Nyembu, Nene, Jike, Senagi, Nyembo, and Denigi Nyembo some Tanje, Nyembu. When Nyembo Tienche going Bene Chikewa to Baina, Kewa the Shukshi Gores, Nanjik Dazing Nyembo, Damia Tombani, some Daj Dushine, and the Kewa to Baina, Tombani, some time Dini Kunela Kewa to Baina, she's not that Kewa the Shukshi Gores, as Nyembo in the Langba Niset.
Third characteristic required to ensure that our virtuous endeavors produce great results is presented in the second line, also motivated by antidotes. So when an affliction arises, to incorporate in one's virtuous motivation an antidote to that affliction, so that the affliction doesn't taint one's motivation. So if attachment arises, cultivate non-attachment. If anger or annoyance or frustration arises, cultivate love. Or if one is miserly, noticing this then, cultivate in that instance generosity. And in all instances, so as to deal with the self-grasping attitude, keep in mind the understanding of selflessness. So in these ways, by generating antidotes whenever one notices the presence of an affliction, this will aid the accumulation of virtue.
That in again Chava and Chabiki, Nyembo de la Machava, so Chava said the Desha said that the Chai Udila and the Kova and Koviki chair, and then Nasoshimura, Disulia, and the Uji de la Chava de la Chat, and the Nala Chava Sidu, Udila, Korongi, Yabuchi Yuba, Tele, Labachi, Yidu Ongi, said de la Labachi, then a dingalo go to Tipe Yabura, somebody in the Chava Sigore. Tsumi ichi yukunya lade yudela tsumi ichi seduda tsuda mitunba. Penerwa ngamadu mewa chiliya dondala delaya pene jwadi sero china ka kilo chim da kanjil komaro chibena komangama mena nesel masone komangaro shirwada rinaro chini chibena dile haba nishu siore sambege samdaje samda dile Digal go to Sam Samdada, and the niggas be ninja was Yaworshine, Corona ninja say de la Habash some daje, be Yaworedi, Yawore some dabina, the niggas some de la Chabasi word, that Chaba said initially wore. Bendigo, once a la Haba, Drotaje, and de la Haba get some diet de la Chabasi. And going to do that, Benanga the Zewa Seada, Chaba Seada, Dobodoji, and the Tuyagi, Jige Zewa. 제와 세야다 수수 잠제 세야다 미 전부 제와 제고래 전부 제고래 아니 세야다 차화지 주에 저우로 최고래 제자다 차화 세야디 돈다 가르스는 그런 게 변이 난도 거부지해질이야 거부지해려 그런 게 거부지해게 유들 거부지해게 세지어라 딜을 하봐 제세 그런 약보 딜을 하봐 따지는 딜이야 가와 개와는다 이 차화세고 이 가와데 그런 게 가와지기 약부 체지어로와 체대를 하바지 따지네 델을 하바 따네 가와지나 니 차바시 그래.
So a moment ago I mentioned that non-attachment is the antidote to attachment. So when one notices attachment in the mind, and attachment arises so easily, recognize that whatever it is that we are attached to, this mind of attachment itself is what is keeping us bound in cyclic existence. In that, the role or the function of attachment is that it exaggerates the qualities of what we are attached to or what we have attachment towards. So let's say something has a realistic value of $5. But we believe it has a value of $20. So here there's this process of exaggeration. If everyone would recognize $5 is the right value for something, but we are quite excited by it, stimulated by it, and we see its worth as $20. There's a process here of exaggeration. This is similar then to the role of attachment. And if you think of it in relation, in the context of relationships, love and attachment, so love in the Buddhist context and attachment for someone, these we often confuse because both have shared characteristics. Let's say, love and romantic love both have shared characteristics in that there's a caring aspect, a tender aspect, a closeness. But attachment exaggerates qualities of the person towards whom we have this romantic love or the attachment. So this is the role that attachment plays. It serves to exaggerate particular good qualities of something.
내가 저기 미로시네 반주 차과 숙침보시되 가로 파저데 가르체네 배 둘로 가는 시간에 인지보 통되게 아니 계시로지 가는 시에나 인지보 통되게 지 통도거라 지 이동와 그냥 통되고 그래다 그 차벽이 숙침보이니까 차바디 파 예로데 되는 교연신에 어디디 디디레도 연화되는 용거래.
So attachment has this function of exaggerating something's qualities. So if you have attachment for someone, so romantic love, if in particular in the early blush of romantic love with someone, whatever they're wearing will appear as pleasing to your eye. Whatever they say, just hearing their voice will bring great delight to your mind. This is because of the presence, or the dominance rather, of attachment that is exaggerating the qualities of this person. In this case, what they're wearing, what they're saying, that exaggeration leads to the distortion of the way we relate to the person.
콜비 아주 콜비 취했다 아주게 네 강김다 강바다 잘라라 소바다 아주게 베제다데 요 콜비 취했으기로 하다 아주게 단 내게 마차발라 요도다 마차바자디 다 데네 코와는 콜비게 취들래 닝보메바 다들래 닝보메바 어다 기지기지 지비라지 요어는 냄지 메바 차를 내게 닝보 가 이때 데네가 제지 유에나야 소설이야 아니 되게 분수 소바도 영투에 기내요 말레스 지상 가제 되는지 유절라로 되네 변에 가제 유협에는 디견제는 강아 영야다 되네 망고 튀야도 지상다 코어는 코유출에 닝보메바 닝보누 선배 닝보메바 통에 다 될래데 타르제냐 아니 코 될래 타르베게 타바를 토고도 선배 삼담에 있는다 마차바세 최고를 때까지 코어는 코유출이야 차바 기고 말아 대장 코위에 출라 먼저 연내 탐지 코와는 코위에 출 탐지는 연내 니가야 삼다에도 될래 차와 기고래 대단 코와던 그시 윤로지 인보 매바 통일도 될래 차와 기고 뭐 진짜도 코와던 코위 규치 연된디게리아 포유 최들이야 인보 매바 대비 르들다 마차 봐서 되는 시고고 진짜 되는 인보 매바 대비 토네 안 소수기 유제들래 비어바이나 다데 인보요 말스 다 그디는 이미지는 라루고래 이미지는 조루고래 이미지를 소소히 매바치는 라루고래 제산 인보스가요 말 매바자 다데 소소기 예디 갑려야 아니 야권출래 추버부에다 샹리야 짐바다지는 야고래 선배 삼다베나 두신다베나다 마차바 삼다제 네 마차베 돈에 아니 짐비냐면 짐바다와 차고래 지난 딘데 삼다지 담아 있나 아니 개와체 용고래 에서시
So, attachment is the affliction of attachment is a mind that is always negative. It's being an affliction, and it's we have it towards the various objects of samsara, homes, furnishings within the home, and so forth. A wide number of things that we have attachment for, and qualities and so forth. So the mind of non-attachment is a mind, so that the mind of non-attachment, the antidote to attachment, comes about when we recognize, firstly, that the presence of attachment in relation to something, and we recognize that if there's attachment present, it means I am exaggerating whatever good qualities I am attached towards. And recognizing that there is this aspect of exaggeration with the affliction of attachment, we recognize our way of thinking is not in accordance with reality. Therefore, I'm misconceiving how something actually is. And therefore, through this misconception, faults will follow. For example, overvaluing something, placing too much value onto something, an exaggeration of the value something has, that attachment will lead to over-dominance in my mind of my desire for it. And I will be distracted from other things of value by thinking so much about this thing that I have this exaggeration of value towards, or I've placed an exaggerated value upon. Moreover, if I obtain it, it will never be able to fulfill my deep wish for lasting happiness, and in fact will almost certainly lead to unhappiness. Unhappiness when I lose what I gained. Unhappiness when there's something now better that I desire and I want to replace it, whatever it may be. So in brief, all these delights of samsara, so not just material things, but whatever it is that we are attached to, we need to recognize that these delights of samsara will not last. Our attachment for them is a mind that is distorting reality and therefore will lead us to accruing non-virtue. Recognizing this then, if we have trained well, we will arrest this afflicted mind and rather turn our mind towards a greater goal, that of liberation and enlightenment. And by doing so, we'll recognize this object that is still bound in samsara, rather than craving it, let me put it to good use, and I can offer it to others. If I possess it, I can give it away. If I don't possess it, I'll generate the wish. May all beings have this, and I'll let go of my attachment. So in this way, by being skillful, when we recognize the attachment, we challenge our attachment, and we rather replace this mind of attachment with a virtuous mind.
디나진다 콘도기 님보 샹리에 체외 삼바되기 님보들라 진시샹리에 잠바 공미에서 제자당 안주기 샹리 샘제 참말이야 디기데 템퍼쇼 디기 된고 제자다 라나신 대화 되바래 콘조 동안 미되바래 제자 디네자 콘조 대화 고고 샘제 템제 대화된 템퍼쇼 샘비게 삼다제 콘조 디기 주요나 대화 템퍼쇼 샘비 대위 잠베스 잠제게 삼노 디군에 라제니 샹리에 짐바다야라서 로제야 펜버두야라서 바나 아니 소수게 개와투베네 녜신 샘제 탐제를 디기도 중요하쇼 디던달량에 아니 쳐버푸고에 and did on the lang ask I did on the lang come give you, Lucian, and Yamnichigus and some danger, Lucian Guno, down bosom jelly, jamba, sir, jambas, sticky. Dene, there were the den, jamba kisses some gentle, there were the dena, some of the drawer, Dennis some time, there were the dimby dollar, and engage you control the chimba tongue, you control the chuba pugins and big, do chu puya down, and the gawa carriage away in there, do chineke, some danger, Guno, the negatone, Yambo said to that, Sevi, some big Yambo, Dene, and jamba some danger, gawa to bena, that gawa to shoot him with his ashes.
When we notice minds of anger, again, anger is a very broad, a word relating to a very broad class of minds, from frustration and annoyance all the way up to rage and hatred. So when we notice such a mind arise within us, notice that, recognize that, and then generate the antidote, the mind such as love. So if your annoyance, frustration, anger is directed towards someone, recognizing the rise of this affliction, generate the antidote. May this being attain happiness. This being who's acting in this way I dislike, or speaking in a way I dislike, or holding a view that I dislike, may this being have happiness. May they gain freedom from suffering and abide in lasting happiness. Whatever I can do to help this person, I will do so. And if I have the privilege, the opportunity to help them directly, I will do so. And if I do not have the opportunity to help them directly, I will do so indirectly. For example, this virtuous mind I'm generating now in relation towards them, I dedicate this merit so that it ripens on their continuum, so that they come to, through this dedication of merit, to accumulate the causes for happiness. And in fact, I will set aside some of my day right now, and I will accumulate a merit for them. Perhaps I'll recite some mantras, whatever it is, or I'll make some offerings on their behalf. Imagine them alongside me making these offerings. And I will dedicate this merit to them. May they achieve happiness. And in fact, may all beings who are suffering from afflictions like they are, may they gain freedom. May they abide in lasting happiness. So in this way, when one notices the arisal of the affliction, of anger, immediately respond skillfully by generating its antidote of love.
And dia kiri again and Susugi Haji Gawatule Simjan Tamja Dewa the Dembashu, Dewa the Dembe children in the Jiggy, Sambig, Samjali, Jambi, Sambukunia large, to Skewa Chevainada, Gawat Catching Bunguris, and in Denigi, Gawa Kanji Batina, Yana Yato Mudu Chepana, Gawa Catching Gawache Yunguri said, Chesada Gawachi Che, Yadi, Mudu Dugi Chene Chevana. On the Yana and the top of Guntu, Jevan, Gawacha Yunguresa. That the nigger Gulong Chaneda, that Guntu Jevan, Guntu Majeva in there, Gabde Sarajikni Sum Jeva in there, Gulong de Nigatone, Gulong Shu Trapota, the Nigi, Jamzigi, Samnatone, Gawatubena, Gawatishu Yunguresa, or the Gulong Chane, and the Gawashu Yonda, and do Namjin and Tapa dus Jevana, and Gawashu Yunguresa, Dusundua.
Therefore, as we've seen in these two lines, how to generate strong virtue. Firstly, what makes something virtuous or not depends on the motivation. And we see this term motivated in both lines. So the motivation we need to cultivate, because it is what determines whether an action is virtuous or not. And whether it's virtuous or not, and how virtuous it is. So therefore, one is encouraged to generate a motivation of bodhicitta and have this motivation of bodhicitta as one's guiding light throughout one's day. And trying to keep this mind of bodhicitta alive within oneself throughout one's day, it will start to become continuous. In other words, one will become habituated to it. And by doing so again and again, generating a virtuous motivation, thinking about the result that you want to achieve, for example, May all beings abide in happiness. May no being ever suffer. May all that I do bring this about. By generating an ever greater yearning for all beings to abide in happiness, for all beings throughout the worlds to abide in happiness, one's resolve becomes strong. One becomes determined. So there's this relationship between developing a continuous virtuous motivation and that the resolve of that motivation being strong or being a determined attitude. But as trainees, afflictions will certainly rise, and rise all too often. When they do, notice that and immediately apply an antidote. The affliction itself arising is not such a problem. Noticing it and applying the antidote, then that means our virtuous attitude is once again restored. And in this way, this too will aid our resolve remaining strong and our virtuous motivation continuing to be remaining continuous, or continuously remaining perhaps. In this way, we'll come to accumulate extensive virtue.
Chopuyagi Imbaina, Penanga, Jimbar Tavadama, and the Simchelia, Jimbataya, Dini, Benesimja, Dundolia, Milichin Bata, Dineda Soingura Jimbata Udela. The Negia Chopu, and Yunela Timba, Conjo Sum, La Pubaina, that Jida, Masimjela Jimbatame, Payore, in a Andelia, Xing, Yundi Cabajo, Conjo Sumlia, Chopuena, Di Chopiadi, they knew Anzuligi. Gawalmas, Gawache, what is it? Indian Dani, Pendoshin, said the Yundian, and then you trouble for you, and then Anzuli, Yundian, Yayaki, that conjures Sanju Conjo, Choco, Kidu Latine, that Sanju Conjo, Chus, Kidun Conjo, Anzul Roach, and Anzuki, and then Tumase, and then Digudu, Yamlet Bachasa, that Conjosum Latin, the Yungozak, that Deniki, Conjosum Telia. Lamden Chegi, Nuba Chasa Yoba, and the Shelia, Lamduchi, Zewe Yoba, Nubu Yoba, Zewe Yundan, Nubu Yundan, and the Kimbu Yundan, and the Denigi, and Jig Tilegi Yundan Chasa, Denigi Yoba Inza, Denigi Yubiki Yundan, Jen, Conchosumlia Chopuina, and Chobudi, Dobianzulia Chopuina, Jimbatawan, Shan Simjeli Jimbatawale, Denigi. The
third line, in the fields of excellent qualities. So this now presents the various groupings of those towards whom one directs one's virtuous activities, such as generosity. So looking at that of the field of excellent qualities. So this refers to the three jewels: the Buddha jewel, the founder teacher, the Dharma jewel, the actual refuge, the qualities of true cessations and true paths, and the Sangha jewel, the Arya Bodhisattvas who are our companions. So when this particular field of virtue is one in which extensive merit can be created because they are a field of excellent qualities, of superb qualities. Therefore, making, for example, offerings towards them leads to the accumulation of extensive virtue. So when, for example, one makes offerings to the Buddha jewel, recall the great qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind. And the mental qualities include the wisdom, the wisdom of the Buddhas, the loving kindness of the Buddhas, the enlightened activity of the Buddhas. And through having reminded oneself of the incredible qualities of the Buddha, then making offerings, one will accrue extensive virtue.
Naki Shinya Soba, the Judges and Bala Soba, the Nigger Demba, and that Lam Yamden chicken, then the Yanji Dushine, as Julian Dinigi Cavacho, Yuti and Lecho Pinada, Jimba Chiba de Cavachavardes. And the Pendo Pishing Sosolia, getting Chimba, getting a Sosolia, Pendo to the Duken Delia, and Sosogi, Chike, Jimbata, Dinigi, Yapuina, Yash, Jidan Semgelia, Jike se la soba jimba kwe la soba jimba dang, rang la ya jing chimba, rang la pando ba rangi pama dang, rangi na pama me ne sosol ya be gedin chimba chunchun ne sosol ya be roba che kanga diki tubi ya le pando che tugen kanga desol ya nga jugi du shine jike se la soba kwe la soba jimba desol puwa ina shan la puwa le ane yun ten chi penyon che yung gore esa chi pando be shing se disu gore.
So included in this first field, that of the field of excellent qualities, in addition to the three jewels, will be all bodhisattvas as well as one's spiritual teachers. And they are included in this field of excellent qualities because the qualities that they possess are so remarkable. The second field is the field of benefit. So these are those who have brought direct help to you. And here in particular, one would think whilst those who bring help to us and are of benefit to us are broad and expansive, for example, those who directly and indirectly lead to the production of the food that sustains us. Here we really are thinking about our caregivers, in particular when we are young and vulnerable. So for most it will be one's parents, but whomever it was that cared for one when one was young and vulnerable and really helpless. Here we think of them, and then as acts of kindness towards them, offerings towards them, and so forth, is also an excellent field.
Nebala soba denegi nyamda ganga shu che duen jilia na roba che je ko dunga ji je ba ina di phan che yung res Bendigo ad mi ji saya tun ya me ganga shu yu den ji na saya tun ganga shira me den ji la se te ba je ba na saya tun ya me ke ganga chimbu yu yin de ya ani ji je ba na ani kol ya phedo che yung go ro ji za su su ya ji ke ko ganga di shu che se to ba za ne ke wa che yung res benen saya tun ya ganga che du gen dulo media ganga chedigen neba nyamda manjugi thone ganga media ganga chedigen and denigi shiyen jaya ya deni thone ganga chedigen deni jigdu shine ganga nyamda be ganga yedigen la and roba chebena gewa pando chebena di ne gewa di shukche yugures.
The third field is the field of suffering. And this refers to those beings who are in a particular dire situation, such as those who are ill, and especially if their illness is severe or their fear about their illness is intense, as well as those who are destitute, and those who, in that sense, are without protection. So these are beings whose situation is quite desperate. So reaching out to them with compassion, helping them, making offerings to them, being of benefit in their lives. This too is a field in which one can accrue great virtue.
Ana gechin gurus ne gewa che yongure se da di gewa che yongor sen dine gang ya chadan jaya gewa karna gyunji tabra cheba ne gechin guru ngombe ka gewa ji ani kunlo shuk chimbe ko ne cheba ina gewa chimbo yongure se che da nyembo jamba da ani ma chaba dine ge samna ta we thone gewa tuba ne gewa de che yongure se da yende je da yende yu jimba ta sa chego puse yugi chene cheba ina ane yende je jamni je komya jan je semba la soba da konjo sum la so chego bena cheba puena rangi kiwe shin lama la soba dine ge chego puena ane ki yende cheyu gewa cheyu gores ane ran le ya pando be ge rangi pama la soba ran le ya gedin chewa de sulya du shine jike ya jimba ta ya da din chomba ina ane pamba du ba ina gewa pe cheyu gores ya simja kanga dunga nyamdaba kanga ju yoyin desolya andushine ne roba cheba ina ne gewa cheyung gore esaji donada unzu gewa cheyung da dushire ese sungoro.
So these are, now look, the fourth line, great virtue will be reaped. So in relation to engaging with these three fields, those of excellent qualities, those of benefits, and those of suffering, one will accrue great virtue. So that when one is for example, making offerings to those with excellent qualities, one will do so with a deep and sincere respect, even a sense of awe for their excellent qualities. And because of this attitude, one will accrue great virtue in terms of our virtuous activities towards them. Likewise, those who have been of great benefit towards us, with a sincere attitude of gratitude when making offerings or being of help to them in any way, engaging in virtuous endeavors towards them, with this motivation of gratitude towards the field of benefit, one will accrue great virtue. And likewise towards those who are suffering, reaching out with tenderness, with compassion towards those who are in a grave situation, being of benefit to them, one will accrue great virtue. So in this way, in relation to these three distinct fields, one can, with this attitude as mentioned, develop great virtue.
Concho Sumlia, and a jig, show up the Kawad, Kawad chair, Concho Sumlia, and a Kunjo Cheva, the Dinichev Divine Diva chair, and Jizan Rangi Pamadan, and Pamalo Sobalia, and a jig Roger Duchev and the Kawache Yungure, Rangi Pamalo Sobalia, and Jiggy Kanga Jevena, Dinitiva Diva chair Yungure, said Jezadang and Jugulamrinalia, Kawa, Leakana Shedu, and Casa Shingu Topi, and top chawa said the Gawa the Mio top chawa said to Sungura don't Chibarito. Chibarwada sing the Indian defender Chibarwa sing.
And this you would have come across in the Lam Room as well, where in terms of our endeavors, whether virtuous or non-virtuous, towards the field of excellent qualities, to the field of benefits, one will accrue, if one's activities are virtuous, extensive merit, or if one's activities are non-virtuous, towards these fields of benefits or excellent qualities, one will accrue extensive non-virtue.
Anjuge Kawachine didn't some that Kawachine Kawa top che Yungure, some the Sumada, Kawa top chebanza, the Docho de Leda, the Negi, Conjo Sumlia, and the Jugended Conjo Sumlia, and the Jig, or Jenny Migawa Savana, Migawa Shucha Charua, and the Singing, and the Pandobe singing Pamalo Sobalia, and the never given a divache side, Jibacharo, did not soon or soon, but Shula did go over.
This is in relation both to virtue and non-virtue, in that if one has a virtuous attitude and makes offerings to the three jewels, one will accrue extensive virtue. But if one's attitude is negative, one will accrue non-virtue, and likewise towards one's parents. If one has a wholesome attitude towards them, one will accrue extensive virtue. But if one has a negative attitude towards one's parents or caregivers, then one will accrue extensive non-virtue.
Casing Dana, Casing Deda Dan Denjene, Lenum Dagi Dado Jas, Lenum Kunla Sulayang, Dober Jawama Inos.
The 82nd verse. Endowed with skill and filled with faith, always engage in activities oneself. In whatever actions you perform, you need not depend upon anyone else.
Just casing is the Dangan Jugi Chawa Garret Rubine, Langdorgi near Delia, how go what you Kavachi, how go what you were or Damboda, and J. Macho, the Karakarim by the DJ Macho, Nyamso Longo, the Dirias and Yamlan Jogo, Diri said, on the Penanzi, Shelley, serious Samba said, J. Macho, Dijena, Rashi Nigala, Ganga, Tipo, which is serious Samba said, Kigio Mare said. That Shelley, Jamba, and serious Samba Ki already, Rashi Nigala, Yamlan Jogo, said, the Langdorgi near Kava said this order, casing, said the Langdorgi near La Kava. J. Macho Badike, Rajan Nigala, Ganga Yaki, Karkarimba di Hago, or DJ Chogo Mare said, Hago Bache, that Rajan Nigala, Pembig, Java, some not in that Lagan Karina di Hago, or Dinazid, Yamlenjo Langore said, Casing said, the Nigel Landorgini, Hago Adela, Kappa Asore. And the Kappa, and the Majeda, giving Yamlen JV Kabli in Eda, Kanakanajo, Tabokulong Kanajo, which kind of Julia, some kind of Dennis Chassan, some Dana, the Hago Vadela, and the Kappa, the Judola Kappa, Juba, nhằm chế thang lại và chú bảo bằng thang thì lại khai bà anh ấy hậu khai bà sẽ hậu có bà sẽ vào đó sinh bà sẽ vào đó sinh đã khai bà mà sinh đã khai bà mà rồi thì cái này đi rồi anh chị ao chấp sinh đấy anh chị khai bà mà sinh đấy đi rồi chỉ là lúc trong cái này sinh bà đấy khai bà chào rồi khai bà sẽ đi xe bà là có rồi hậu có là chỉ là đó chụp đồ chế bà lại bà bằng của cái này cái sản phẩm của đấy nhằm sự liên biệt gặp là cái này nhằm chế của đấy hậu có bà trên nhằm cái chế của đấy sẽ khai sinh sẽ đi đi rồi nhằm nên chế bị gặp là đang ở cái vị cao nhằm nên cái chế bị na cái vị nhằm nên lòng được cái này thì cái bằng của đó hậu của lòng của đó hậu của chế lòng của nhằm nên chế bị gặp là cái này chế của chế số hậu của chế都是nhằm nên chế của đấy是送过来。
Look, now the first term, endowed with skill. So skill, in other contexts, will be translated as learned or could be knowledgeable. So what does skill refer to here? It refers to being knowledgeable and therefore skilled in what is to be adopted, what is to be abandoned. In other words, to have developed an excellent understanding of the Dharma and how to engage in it. Because to be skilled in the context here means understanding what is a virtuous motivation, a virtuous attitude, and how to cultivate it. What are the afflictions, and to recognize them. So, for example, in our society, all too often afflictions are not seen as faulty or perhaps even praiseworthy. But if someone is skilled in the Dharma, they'll recognize that it's never acceptable to have, for example, a negative attitude towards someone, or have an aggressive mind towards someone, to have any kind of negative attitude towards someone. So that will be part of being skilled. The other part of being skilled will be what to do when an affliction has arisen, what the antidote is, and be skilled in cultivating it. So immediately to eradicate an afflicted attitude and replace it with its antidote. In other words, if one has a negative attitude towards someone, to develop an attitude of love or compassion towards them, so that immediately the harsh mind is subdued and one's heart opens to this person instead. So this is someone who's skilled in what should be adopted and what should be abandoned. And moreover, not only are they skilled in what should be abandoned, and rather what are those antidotes to adopt, but how to develop them strongly, how to develop virtuous minds strongly, so that this virtuous motivation becomes dominant within one. So this is the meaning of being skilled.
dene keishin da dangden denje ne sede da dangden se da deden se de sikyu mira yungdo den ede dangden so ina deden deba da denba jisan kiwe nyamle gang cheba tilya deba che ani di kumchen to deba yago che ne deba ko ri yes deba da debi ko ne che ko yes deden ne ani deba da denba da kiwe jawa di cheba la ya gashin zhuxin wen ne che ko yes de deden da denche ne satisfied give nyamlen cheba de la gashin zhuyu deba da nyamlen che le deba da gashin zhuyu ko ne che ko yes.
The second quality in the first line, endowed with skill and filled with faith. So an attitude of faith comes with being skilled. In other words, one has faith in the teachings and the result that it will lead to. So being filled with faith means one will have a joyous attitude because one believes in what one is doing. So being filled with faith means that you'll have a joyous attitude towards abandoning what needs to be abandoned, embracing or cultivating what needs to be cultivated. This is then being filled with faith.
Lenam dage tautu chas. Lenam sede kiwi nyamle chia di suor dang tu kiwi nyamle chia kewe na jime nyamle chia chudun nyamle chia sube nyamle chia chundun nyamle chia samde shiraki nyamle chia pashin tu la soba nyamle chia re dini jam nyinje la soba nyamle chia nga jiyo kowa la ngejun samda kumya la soba da nga jiyo namyun ne da jige gunsho la chubo puye da cha tsewa la kora la soba kiwi nyamle kare chebe ine da dini lenam dage tautu cha sede chesada dine keishin langdurge ne nyamlen rimba digi pa yabo hakuwa che dine nyamlen kewe nyamlen che alpe gashin zhuxin deba de dine gashin zhuyu guane an li kewa digi an dagi sosorangi 뒤 따도 무디니 제고리에서 다기 따도 자스 레남 다기 따도 자스.
The second line, always engage in activities oneself. So here, one should always engage in virtuous activities. So these will be those that we know of the six perfections, those of generosity and ethics and patience and joyous perseverance, concentration and wisdom, as well as compassion and love, as well as the preliminaries to those, thinking about the faults of cyclic existence. And then expressing these in physical behavior, such as making offerings or doing circumambulation, mantra recitation, and so forth. So one should always be engaging in virtuous activities oneself. So this means that, now we're linking to the first line, having become endowed with skill, in other words, so because this word skill can be translated most commonly as scholar or learned. So being learned in the Dharma, having a deep understanding of the Dharma in terms of what should be abandoned, what minds to abandon, and what to cultivate, and how to do so. And that skill leads to a deep faith arising. In other words, a joyous attitude, a delight in engaging in the Dharma. Then it becomes very easy with such skill and being filled with faith to always engage in virtue.
Jisadang Lenam, Lenam, Kiwi Lenam, Sigore, Kiwi Lenam, Kiwi Ledelia, and the Chasan Kewachasan, Kiwi Lenam, Sidinan, Leo, Kewali, Kewachi, Kiwi Lekangi, Batamchi Sura, Dangaji in Jimbi, Yamlenchi, some Dabinata, Kashing, Deda, Kabacha, Kiwi Jimmy, Yamlechevala, Kabachi, or City, Dambo, some Daneda, Anzulia, Chienlia, Jimbi, Yamlemache, the Sena Chevanet, Digi Sena said. 저기 안에 개와 치마 다데디 소소에 세나제 세나디 왕게 소소야 강한 몽고실리그리스 안디 마제 디기 대부디레 개와 치마이나 소소야 변주 튀게 강한 차고레스 두시네 지단 세나세디 라신 아니 세나 여반의 시행 강한 주여반의 델레 로치기 말고 강한세 두고 말레스 지단 체딜레 삼나 샹레이나 뉴기 팽기 말레 랑레이나 강한되게 디 대부이네 아니 직방오바나 강한마 동안마도 여 말에 선배 삼단에 다디 세나세데 지 민도아 선배다 디파 하고 와제 안디네기시 데네 하나 디도쇼리아 진비기 냠는 제베이나 소수기 체딜이네 소수기 진밭 샹레 로제 펜바 직 최고부야라 소바 샹레 로제 진밭 나와이나 안 소수이네 개와사고레 디마저 소수네 셈 로디고 미네 어데미 소수기 미 지게 거부지 해 소소래 망아 용그레스 안 소수기 진밭 나와이디 파추게 강한세네 코소 강아이가 강한데 세제 콘솔레 판배 콘지 디기 두고레 셈베게 삼다야다 제니기 진볕 나위게 선음 디기 개와 치마이나 소소 강도 개반 땡델이야 소수기 롱주게 강한 마트고 용그레 셈베게 데니게 안 상예다 전주 선바 탐지기 진비 냠는 제네 안 고외 동아 차설로 되제 야 상지고마 토고 시상한테 상지고마 토발아야 진비 냠는 탈심 고고레스 지산 진비 냠는 빼 야보레 셈베게 데니게 삼다지 냠는 디 냠는 제고도 셈베다 냠는 제고야 다 하고 가지 두 사고 얘네 냠내지 때 띵에 냠내 지긴 셈베게다 다 삼바 대시간 직당번라 따바로 원신기라 바세도 원신 당에디 뺀 냠내 지긴 셈베게다 dimbo 잡고게 두시네 다 냠보세 레사를 가서는 세나체나 안에 되네 강가 용구되네 용구래 셈베게 다 짐바 따와에 편에 되네 여러 삼다도 세네 냠보 삼다사래 두시네 삼다제 안에 가신 디 되는게 진배 냠내 제바디 대나 데베 대바단 가신 주용원에 아니 다도 랑기 뒤 다도 냠내 제고래 해야지 어두시네 제 다도 자스 두 제고래 해서 송고로 진행 인자다 디기 된다 삼다도 대시에 다보는 원신 기랑배 아니 님부이네 랑자신 세야디다 된다 차산 냠내 냠들이 용고를 다 두삼다 제외나
The second line doesn't explicitly state virtuous activities, but it would be implied because of the first line referring to skill, that is skill in the Dharma, leading to faith in the Dharma arising. So again, the second line says always engage in activities oneself, and so the implication is those activities that one should be engaging in at all times is virtuous. So let's then take an illustration of a virtuous activity of generosity. So generosity is the wish to give of oneself. It's most often thought of as giving materially, but we should not limit our understanding to merely or only material generosity. It's a wish to give of oneself in any way that one has capacity to be of benefit. So how would one be endowed with skill and filled with faith, always engaging in the virtuous activity of generosity oneself? Well, first, one needs to become skilled in generosity. And to be skilled in generosity usually will start with will start with a clear recognition of the opposite mind to generosity, that of miserliness, and in particular, its many faults. And in addition to recognizing the many faults of miserliness, one necessarily must see the faults of oneself being miserly and recognizing the presence of that affliction within oneself. So this is where one starts with becoming skilled in relation to generosity, is by recognizing miserliness within oneself and the faults of that miserliness. And the faults in relation, this is the normal fourfold permutation, the faults in relation firstly to oneself, in that when one is miserly, one is grasping, one's mind is narrow and tight, one is thinking of oneself alone. The second way, the second permutation, the first is in relation to self, the second is in relation to others. There we recognize, when I am miserly, not only am I suffering because I'm closed-minded, I'm thinking just of myself, I actually have here the capacity to be of benefit to others, to give of myself and be of benefit to others, but I'm not doing so. So their suffering is being perpetuated despite being in the presence of someone who could ease their suffering. That person, myself, due to the affliction of miserliness, is not helping them, is not easing their suffering when I have that capacity. So in this way, I'm suffering now, and so too are others. But these are the first two permutations, and the second two also relate to self and others, but in lives to come. So through the accumulation of non-virtue, through this affliction of miserliness, I will experience negative results in lives to come. And also, by not helping others now, building a positive relationship with others, we won't I've missed the opportunity to have a good relationship or good karmic connection with this person in lives to come. So in this way, we have the faults of miserliness in relation to myself and others in this life and lives to come. So we see here, by looking at miserliness and recognizing it within oneself, that as long as this mind has free reign within me, or to the extent it has free reign within me, that self-centered attitude will cause me to suffer now, and my aspiration to become a bodhisattva will remain distant, or the fulfillment of that aspiration will remain distant. Moreover, others are suffering due to my miserliness, and I will not be following in the footsteps of my role models who give of themselves freely. Wherever there's the opportunity, they give of themselves. So in this way, we become skilled in generosity by recognizing the faults of miserliness and the benefits of generosity. In that one accumulates extensive virtue, one eats the suffering of others, one creates the causes for happiness oneself, and so forth. And by becoming skilled in generosity, one grows in faith in the Dharma, faith in the practice of generosity, faith in the karmic consequences that follow from a generous attitude, and faith that one can spiritually evolve. And by becoming ever more skilled, now linking to the first verse, or the verse we looked at earlier, one will develop a strong resolve, a determined attitude. I will be a generous person. I will give of myself. I will not allow the self-centered attitude of miserliness to deceive me, but I will give of myself. And when I notice, still linking to the 81st verse, when I notice this affliction of miserliness arise, I will apply the antidote of generosity. I will not allow myself to be deceived by my afflictions anymore, and I will give of myself towards any of the fields, whether of excellent qualities, benefit, or suffering. And in this way, I know I will accrue great virtue. So in this way, we see the link between these first two lines in the 82nd verse and the previous verse.
Tati samba digi kien chene, ane chigi shen liya kichi na tsik tsubu shea, shen liya gyun jo che ya, ane lu yi na shen liya nyo ya, ane deni chi yungduwa, cheza deni cheba ina, deni ki tsewe samlo digi lunga ki choba de ngamba che le, lunga ki choba ngamba digi shen liya nyo, ane shen liya kanga che, shen liya kanga shen ma kiwa zoya, shen liya kanga che ya da, ane rang ine ma kiwa kanga zoya, rang shi niga la ma kiwa yungduwa, cheza de tsewe samba saya de yakbo mendus. And denige samlo jeyodu, and denige shan lia tsewe samba ge shan lia tsewe gi jawa jeyodu, and liang ambasa de kiwa chima ine sosu dunga yunga ya chagres. Shiza de di gyune nyamlen chi samlo gyune korju me geju mendu sambe tsewe samba de bangu do sambe ge samlo shita. Da dene bangne samgan da tsewe samba bangba ina shan lia neba chigi me sambe ge tsewe samba bangba neba chigi me sambe neba chede samba bangba ina. And lunga joba shanlia new mares, shanlia tawa ching mares, shanlia tawa majedu, and sosine and digi tempachida, shanlia ganga matebashin, no makiva yungure, shanza shanlia new big samba makena, shanlia never king marchesa, never chingme, sembe some tavaina, and surim soina, digi tebu de kiwa chimainea, one yokomato, toyagi. And the ten dela giving him the chicken, and when you come out top to work, pay operator, that's some somewhat, Chimbrido as and big. Denigita, Balange cabat to say how watch it, Denig sometimes, Denig sometimes in Dangi only Lunga Sunibun in Yejo don't be Sungi, San Beda, Denigi, Sanje Danjus and Batamje, and the Tsurim Sunyam and Dina San Yokoba to word, Chizanga in San Yokoba to San Yokoba Tobala, Tsurim Masona did. That talk to me, the Inzangi, Semja Tamjig, San Yoko, Togo, the Inzangi Sudim, the Sungu, the ring Sunya Cobra, Bemas, Yahweh, Sembe, Kashi and Dression, the nigger some time to Lunga is New Nation and never saw in the Jigmea, some big, some Tawina, that day, once you get that dinner, Sunship, Tsigang, Ni, Chigi, Damboshi, that is Chasan, somebody. Don't that do not do Yamni Chigor Chazada, Casing Kevada, and the data Demba Sadia Chagore, and Lehanam Tato give it, Tato Dagi, Tato Cha, sitting in the Munichigin, sometimes the Tato Chava said that Yam Chigore, and then she Tower Winshin said, Gulung, Deva Shuchiba, the Kashin Gubong and the Cheva and Zada, Dushin, Nimbu, some died, the Chazan to Gore, Dushin, she's down to Surmsuya, some died, Dambo, and Neve somebody at the Gun Samta, Digi Cheba and Rashin Nigal Nevada, Mamba and Table Dunga Young over the Samta, or that is did some did the part Gune, Gishu in the Bango to Wosem Samta. Then indeed, Docho, that the negation never check me and be somebody down by na, soon by na, Digi Rashin Nigal Pengu, Mamba in a Sosine, and when you go on top to good, and Tarbata Tamjiki go on, Delatin to war, there's the nigger Surmusu, Pay Yabotu, the Nick Pay Yabores and be Deva. Then Tangin Yamlin chickens and be a Kashian Gune Chevad, and the Angi to Tato, Gedina chickens and be some time, some time, Dangi, Lunga is Muganation and never saw in Chimea, and big to some Tabina. The Nigi that did on that is that change somebody in Yamlet have done that. Some how to stand gore, some gore, what she's not the Tata Chadere.
Let's repeat this meditation, but now in relation to the virtuous quality of ethical restraint. So how to become skilled in relation to the virtuous quality of ethical restraint? And again, this word skilled, it's the same word as scholar. So understand when you see the word scholar, because the meaning often isn't so clear in English. It has this meaning as being presented here of being skilled. So being skilled in ethics means one has reflected deeply on the faults of not being ethical. And one has recognized that, and has done this meditation in relation to oneself. So not merely becoming proficient in theory, but that it is applied to oneself. So not being ethical refers to being under the influence of the afflictions, in particular as expressed in terms of bringing harm to others. So here, the meditation is in terms of the harm of not being ethical, the harm that comes to oneself as well as others in this life and lives to come. So that's the same permutation that you apply. And here, the approach would often be to reflect on ethics as presented in the ethics of abandoning the 10 non-virtues. So you can think about them each individually, or you can just think about in general the need to abandon unethical behavior. Thinking, for example, of the unethical behavior you're most prone to. Perhaps it's speaking badly to others or about others, so harsh speech or divisive speech. Or maybe it would be a physical form of harm, whatever it may be. You recognize that whenever I engage in harmful behavior, whether it's through my speech, my physical behavior, or a way of thinking, so thinking about others in negative ways, I am adding to my own suffering, because whilst I'm acting in this way, again, acting mentally, verbally, or physically, I am afflicted. I'm causing myself to suffer. And when I'm expressing it towards someone else, physically or verbally, I'm adding to their suffering. No one wants to have their possessions stolen, or to be spoken to in a harsh manner, or to even hear divisive speech. This is unpleasant. I just spread my own negativity around through this expression of my afflictions. And moreover, not only do I cause others to suffer through expressing myself in this way, my spiritual aspirations remain merely theoretical. I do not progress towards fulfilling them. Therefore, I will end up leaving this life with my capacity unfulfilled, not becoming the person I long to be, not following in the example of my role models to the extent of my capacity. So recognizing the faults of non-virtuous behavior, of unethical behavior, one generates the virtuous mind, which is a determined attitude, that strong resolve. I will not harm others. I will not harm others through my physical behavior. I will not harm others through my way of speaking, whether directly to them or indirectly about them. And I will take such good care of my mind. I do not allow harmful thoughts about others to dominate within. So thinking like that, one becomes skilled in the practice of ethics. And one develops, linking these verses together, a strong resolve to be ethical at all times. And as that strong resolve grows, one will be ever more continuously ethical. And as one is ever more continuously ethical, one's strong resolve also grows. So these two have this relationship. Moreover, one's faith in the practice of ethics will grow in that, through one deeply understanding the faults of not being ethical and the benefits of being ethical, one's determination grows, and therefore one's faith in what one is determined to do grows. And this leads to the mind, as one becomes ever more skilled in being ethical, one's faith arises in this joyous attitude, this expression of joy, that one delights in being virtuous. And in fact, the very concept of being unethical seems to be alien to oneself. The thought to cause harm seems very strange to oneself. And this is because of the deep faith and the delight one is taking in being ethical. In other words, being ethical is becoming an expression of who you are. Then it's we understand how it's easy, the second line in the 82nd verse, to always engage in ethical activities. And then again linking to the previous verse. With this strong resolve, whenever an affliction arises, one will apply the antidotes, and one will be ethical in relation to all fields, whether it's the field of excellent qualities, the field of benefits, or the field of suffering. One will relate to all others in a way that is ethical. One will do so with a mind of delight, and in this way, one will continuously, always engage in ethical practices.
Lenam kunla sula yang tyobar chawa ma ino se da lenam se yang zo gewe chawa de kong de she de gewe chawa jamni ju ko mya da jimba da surun se wala so ba le gewe nyamle kare cheba ina de so kun sula le nyamlen che ke kewa kanis nyamlen che ba changma la so kun la se de ke na lenam kunla sula yang tyobar chawa ma se mi shanda ki ode chi che sho di che sala na che mi shanda ki ma che la na ma che che tu sha ba na shan la ma tyo ba cha ro da shan ki che sa shan yu ku wa le ya shan yu shan le ya shan yi la ba na che shan yu ku ma che ba na ma che ba she ba na di chi kyo ma che sa shan la ku ma che ba le tyo ma tyo ba ku ma che ge ye na da me na da de la ma tyo ba ye me la ma tyo ba che so su ki dang do lang che mu ni che ko le sa so le nam kun la su la yang tyo bar cha wa mai no si de che sa da ma jo ki we nyam ne so ke ki we nyam ne de ju kong de she ba de ge du se ne nyam ne je di mi shen gi ku ma che ba le tyo ku ma tyo ba ne so ra rang ge dang do lang che ko le so da.
And the last two lines in the 82nd verse. In whatever actions you perform, you need not depend upon anyone else. So what this means is, so again, the third line, in whatever virtuous actions, so the word virtue isn't here, but it will be implied in whatever virtuous actions you perform, you do not depend upon anyone else. So whatever virtuous actions one does, whether it's those of generosity, or ethics, or patience, or joyous perseverance, concentration, wisdom, love, or compassion, whatever it may be, and directed towards whomever, you do not need to be told to engage in these virtuous activities. You do not need to be told to meditate on ethics, on generosity, and so forth. But this is something you do from your own side. You do not require the direct instruction, the being watched by someone else, the instruction of someone else from your side. This becomes an expression of who you are, a virtuous person, a generous person, a loving person, and so forth. You do not require to be led by others.
Kebar jawa chiba kiwe nyamlen cheba la hao go gore se di ge chi mo re dang zu chi so le ga kare na dar wa da ne le ga che da di mi shen le ya go chi so so le ga don da ya go ju ko bi shi ne le ga kare che go ni la kare che al kare che ge shi kare kan ju go chi cha san xin ne che ba na le ga don da ju che ro da de ju che ro ma xin ba che ba ne no tre mong go shen de ne gang ga mong go che di se bo ro ne kala sebe ne kala sweda ya bu xin we ne kala ya bu cha de xin bo ya cha re sweda ma xin we ne ya bu ma cha de xin bo me ba cha ro ne xie le ne wa de ki we ne chi pa du sue da de ne ba ki da jum je ya bu sam da sab so du sue da de ne ya bu ha go wa chi ne ne ji ne ya bu ki tu ro ha mo ga za cha ga ji je ne ba ki xie le ne ba de ki we ne ko le ne ba kan ski go du du sue de ne kan che go kan che ne ya sa sam da ne ba ki we ne sab so je ne ke ya wa ha go je ne ba ki ne ba ya bu ki tu ro dine ne sa ke ha mo ga cha ga si ro ji ne ba ki je ne so so yong ra ni ga yo ro现在dine za ke xian xia de so so yi din na ji da ma zu jia wa du wa che we na da ya ga che we na di che ta de ya wa ha go bi to ne nam ju de din bi to ne che ba na ga ri na je tu ya bu cha du go ro ma ra ke na da ro dina ne dina ji de le ne ngang zu ge yin nyam le che ba de ya se sa su su ge yin nyam le che ba kan che go che dang kan kun long kan che go do an ne du su kan che do ne ne gi che sam ta je an ne ji 제바이네 케바르네 제화야 가네도 제모야 가네도 케신 케바르진에 하고 와진 제바이나 되네 가서 개위 자와디 개와 개체 요야드나 개위 냠네데 야줘야디 어디 세우시고 차려라다디
The third and fourth line refers to engaging in opportunities to be of benefit without being prompted by others or encouraged by others, but embracing every opportunity to be of benefit. So this approach is actually something that's valued in the world. So if you think, for example, if as an employer, if your staff are able to work not just unsupervised, but to take their own initiative, when they see an opportunity or they see that something needs to be done, and they just get on and do it. And not only do they see where there's something to be done and they do it, but they also do it in a way that doesn't cause problems. So they're skilled in what they do. That's an excellent employee. Those are the kinds of staff you want in your business, because your business will flourish. Or likewise, in terms of cooking a meal, someone who's skilled will be able to look at the ingredients that are available, and they'll think of a number of delicious dishes. They won't be impeded by what is and is not available. They'll be able to make something delicious. But even in society, in terms of causing harm, if someone who's skilled in causing harm and does so in a way that's successful so they don't get into trouble, in their fields, this would also be considered praiseworthy. But in our circumstances here, being someone who does not rely on the encouragement or being prompted by others means one has developed the qualities of the Bodhisattva well within. One has become skilled in these various trainings, so that when one thinks of others, let alone when directly engaging with them, immediately thoughts of warmth and care towards them arise. And then, when one has the opportunity to be of direct benefit, one with joy embraces it. Or where those opportunities to be of direct benefit are not there, one isn't lost. One knows that indirectly, by cultivating one's mind or contributing in indirect means, one is able to be of benefit. And still, the same mind of delight, one engages in virtue in these ways, without needing to be directed or prompted or encouraged by others. So then, thank you. We'll conclude there for tonight. Thank you very much. But if there are some questions, then feel free to ask. Then thank you. Thank you.